Afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure for me to be here with all of you. It's so nice to be at my first museum conference. You've all been to this conference at least once, if not more than that. And of course, all the museums and the web conferences in the US. So this is my first time here. So I am supremely underqualified to make a keynote speech. So when Nancy and I talked about what I might share, she said, why don't you talk about what you've been learning as you've gone through this process? I worked in journalism for more than 20 years. I was at the journalism school at Columbia and worked with all kinds of media outlets for the last 20 years. And I moved into this new job at the Met just this past August. And several people have asked me, why did I leave Columbia? Why did I leave the university world to be at the museums? And it was because it was the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I grew up 3 blocks away from the Met in Manhattan, and I went to school 1 block away from the Met. And so I've had what I call a 30-year one-way love affair with the Met. And if you love someone for 30 years and she calls, you've got to take the call. With your wife's permission, you then carry on, which is what I did, and that's how I ended up here. It's especially nice to be at Museums in the Web Asia because I consider myself truly Pan-Asian. I am Indian, but I was born in Tokyo. My father had no problem picking me out in the window. He said, "The brown one is mine." And I have a real interest in the world of Asian art in particular. And this conference, having seen and learned already in just a couple of days so much from watching some of the sessions and following online, I really want this to be an opportunity for us to have a conversation. And I might be the first keynote speaker ever to try and ask you questions instead of you asking me questions. So we'll see how that goes. Wanted to give you my contact information. You have my email address as well as my Twitter handle there. And these slides that I put together are also online on this Google Doc, so bit.ly/3MWA2013. So if you would like to make a note of that, you can. And as I learn more things, I will update this document. So it'll be 6 months, 12 months as we go along. So this will be kind of a living document. Part of the reason I was thinking about this topic is because there are a lot of ways in which journalism and media and museums connect. And when I used to teach journalism and entrepreneurship at Columbia, we used to talk about the importance of 4 particular things that are big in journalism and journalism as we go forward. And the 4 things we used to talk about are video, local, mobile, and social. And all of those, of course, translate into the museum world as well. And especially mobile is something that we think a lot about at the Met as well as in journalism. So first I thought I would share, I'd also use this as an opportunity to show you some of the art at the Met. Many of you have obviously been there and are familiar with the art, but I would use our Instagram collection of Met photographs to bring up some points about the art and about some of these lessons. So first is a compilation of some of the Asian art social media posts that have been done by our social media team at the Met. And so you can see the range of parts of Asia that are represented. And you can see South Asia, China, Japan, et cetera, Southeast Asia represented here in some of our social media outreach. Also wanted to tell you about this particular very important exhibition that's now at the Met, and it runs through April 6th of 2014, and it's the first ever contemporary art from China exhibition at the Met. And it's 35 artists in 14 galleries, and this is the cover of the catalog. And you can go on to Met Museum and take a look at some of the other images from the exhibition. It's a really special exhibition, and I hope you will get a chance to see it online or in person at the Met. So I wanted to tell you what the Chief Digital Officer does at the Met. I work with a world-class team on topics I care about deeply. So video, interactives, apps, mobile, social, geolocation, web, data, etc. We have two of our members of our digital media team at the Met here at the conference, and I hope you got a chance to hear them present about one of our big projects there called 82nd and 5th. And I'd just like to ask Chris Noe and Teresa Lai to wave and stand up and wave. I think you all know them. And they're also here so that if you ask any questions about the Met, which I'm unlikely to know anything about, I'm going to just toss it to them, and they're going to answer. But they are just two of the folks on our very large team at the Met. And if you're familiar with their work, you know how good and special their work is. And like that, we have a whole team that's working on all kinds of aspects of digital media. The museum has been digital for many years. The digital media department was carved out of several departments, including our educational media and our technology departments about 4 years ago. And Erin Coburn, who many of you know, led the department. And then this past year, after she left, they were looking for someone new to come and be the CDO, and that's how I ended up at the Met. So what else does a CDO do? I call this job CDO as the Chief Listening Officer, and that means listening to and working with folks across the museum, but also with all the folks that come into the museum when possible. Unfortunately, or fortunately, that's a whole lot of listening. We have 6.3 million visitors in person. We have in our 2 million square feet of gallery space, 40 special exhibitions a year, and then of course our permanent collection. And then online, we have 24 million unique visitors, 40 million visits, and more than 130 million page views. So this gives you a sense of how much noise and information and data there is at the Met as we try to get a handle on that, our team and everybody at the Met. Here's an example of one of the pictures that we used in Instagram, and I'm going to try and share with you the kind of the biggest, most popular pictures, because that'll give you a sense of what has been working for the Met. Almost everything that I talk about applies obviously to the Met itself, but also some of them may apply to your museums and some may not because of the nature of your collections, as well as the kind of audience that the Met has. So as they say, your mileage may vary. This is a picture, and what I love about this is using Instagram, a relatively new technology, but looking at the Met in 1919. And you might be familiar on Instagram with the hashtag TBT, Throwback Thursday, and that's what you see here. And these Throwback Thursday pictures work really well in our social media efforts. And one of the things that I encouraged people in journalism when I was working in that space, and now I encourage at the Met, is to go into your archives and show off what you have there, because you will find that people are interested in archival material much more than you might think. Of course, our collections in many cases are archive material themselves, but I'm talking about pictures of older things at your institution. So that's what you're seeing here. And at any point, if you have a comment or a question, please jump in. So my first lesson from having been in the museum world now for 4 months is that show up wherever Nancy Proctor asks you to show up. And she once asked me to show up at the Smithsonian, which was slightly easier than showing up here, but I have to stick with that. Here's another piece of art, and I was looking, Nancy for the last couple of days has been wearing a lot of red, so I was looking for something with red to show her from our Instagram collection. And this is William Merritt Chase at the seaside, as you can see. So here's another lesson, that it's all about storytelling. And that's obviously something that comes in the world of journalism, but we've been doing it really well at the Met. And I want to show you an excerpt from 82nd and 5th that Teresa and Chris put together. And this is a piece that I call the iPhone of Ancient Rome. That isn't the official title. The official title is Fine Dining. And how many of you have seen this? Some of you may have seen this. This aired earlier this year. So 82nd and 5th is a series of web episodes. There are 100 episodes that are being released all through 2013. And there are 2 minutes, one curator, one piece of art talking about a particular object. And so we're just going to listen and watch this little excerpt here. This is Chris Lightfoot, a curator, talking.
When one thinks of the Roman world, one tends to think of architecture and sculpture and the impressive ruins of the Roman Empire. But it's the smaller objects that really speak to you directly as an individual, as a person. These are the things that they had in their daily lives. The ancient Greeks, of course, are well known for their drinking parties. But the Romans enjoyed dinners. The Emperor Nero, for example, even had a servant whose only job was to write invitations to dinner parties. This spoon and fork combination would have been used at a well-to-do dinner party. And as a gadget, it clearly was meant to impress. It's like pulling out your latest handheld device in the modern world. It's also a very practical invention for the Romans. They didn't sit at a table. They reclined on dining couches. And so they would be sporting themselves probably with one arm, which meant that they only had one hand free to serve themselves. So having a spoon and fork combination, they could twizzle it around and use whichever end they wanted. And the Romans, because of their...
It's a wonderful detail about why it is that you would need this kind of gadget. And this is an example of the kind of storytelling that we were talking about. And Chris and Teresa and their team did a wonderful job with all 100 episodes. They're just winding down. I hope you will get an opportunity to look at them. If you just search 82nd and 5th, it comes right up. And 82nd and 5th is the address, the physical address of the Met, and that's where the name comes from. And what I especially liked about this is the voice of the curator and the personality comes through. And as you watch all 100 episodes, you'll get a sense of the curators as folks who care deeply about their art. And instead of talking about an exhibition, they're talking about one piece from a very extensive collection. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. So another lesson that I have is that another thing I've learned is that media outlets and museums obsess about social media. The journalism world is filled with folks who do and talk incessantly about social media and are kind of doing their work, a lot of it disproportionately on social. And that's also true now increasingly about the Met and also about museums in general. So here is a list of the social media outlets that the Met is on, and these are all /Met Museum. So if you look at these statistics, we are on Facebook and Twitter and Pinterest and Instagram and Foursquare, and you can see all of these are part of the Met's overall efforts to do outreach and connect. If we have time, we're unlikely to have time, but if we do, I can talk later about some of the specific portions of our social media work. In any case, at the end of these slides for my presentation, you will find details about each of these platforms. So if you just go to the end of the slides, you will find them there as well. And one of the things that Tom Campbell, our director, and I talked about when we were talking about this position was thinking about making this connection between the physical world and the physical objects and the digital world, the in-person and the online, and connecting that experience as best as possible. And so the idea is to make what we call a kind of virtuous circle of people being exposed to all your content where they are, and then liking it so much that they come to the museum. And then people seeing the, people who come to the museum getting a taste of what is the digital aspects of your work so that then they can stay connected. And that's why the apps are so important and the mobile experience is so important. So making that digital and physical virtuous circle is very important as we go forward. Any questions about this?
Sorry,
Yeah, sure.
I'm just wondering if you
Sure.
happen to use Museum Analytics, the service provided from the Dutch group led by Rui Guerra, or if this is just what you're pulling out of platforms. Do you use that platform?
Yeah, I don't think so. I'm not sure. We might be, and I can ask. Our social media efforts are led by Taylor Newby, who is terrific, and I can find out about that and see if we're. But these are pulled out of our regular stats, and so that's where you're seeing these. Here's another piece of art from our Instagram collection. Here's Degas dancers practicing, and you can see that all kinds of art are things that people love to take a look at. Now, we talk a lot about social media, but here's the dirty secret of social media, that almost everyone will miss almost everything you do on social media. It's really because there's too much going on in social media, right? So you know that it took Twitter 3.5 years to hit the first billion tweets, and now it hits 1 billion tweets every 2.5 days. It seems like very recently that YouTube had hit the milestone of 24 hours of video uploaded every minute onto YouTube. And we've recently crossed 100 hours on YouTube. So I tell people that the safest place to put your top secret confidential video is on YouTube. Just put it there and you can be assured that no one will see it. And part of the problem is that there's so much fuss and noise about things like YouTube and viral videos. I don't know if you've ever been in a meeting where someone says, let's create a viral video. It's so ridiculous. I mean, it happens in journalism, right? People say, let's work on a project, let's make it a Pulitzer-winning project, and almost none of those ever win Pulitzers. It's the ones that you're doing the work for its own sake that do really well. And same thing with social media and with YouTube and all these other platforms. So what you have to do is to understand that this is the case, and getting your colleagues and others to understand that just because you throw things onto Twitter and Facebook doesn't mean people will see them. In fact, almost no one will see them is something that we have to keep in mind as you're doing your work. Here is one of my favorite Instagrams from in our rooftop exhibition at the Met. We have a roof garden where we are able to do one artist per season. And this was Imran Qureshi's for 2013. And this was his first large-scale installation in the United States. And the importance of talking to the artists and understanding what they're doing and the context is so important. So one of the things I learned from talking to Imran, and it also might be in the videos that were pulled together for this, is that as he was making these floral patterns that also look like blood and are put on the roof garden, that you can see there's that margin right there, right, where it doesn't cross. And the reason, originally it was going to go all the way to the wall, but he didn't go all the way because when he was installing this, the Boston bombing at the marathon occurred. And he started thinking about the finish line And as you know, the bombing happened right next to the finish line. And so he decided not to cross that margin right there and make that kind of hard stop. And those kinds of details, I think, are so telling about the art, and so important for us to try and connect and understand these so that we can share them at the right opportunity with our audiences. Now, a part of this thinking about social media is that almost everyone will miss almost everything you do on social media until you make a mistake. And then everybody will see your social media post. And this is something that I don't think most organizations have understood. Our team of Taylor and Lucy, they do a very good job of planning their social media posts, thinking them through. They have a month-long calendar that they prepare. Every item is thought through, is considered. They work so hard to make sure that that's as accurate as possible. But I see a lot of folks in the arts just throwing things onto social media. And I think, depending on the context, that's okay. But if you're a big institution, you have to take real care of making sure that your work on social media you do it as seriously as you do your work kind of on websites or print work. And that's important because people will miss it, but your mistakes will be seen, will be noted, will be reblogged, retumblered, etc. And so you have to be, I think, extra careful with social. And that's something that I think that we all need to consider as we're doing social media. Another lesson is that media outlets and museums fret about Facebook's changes. Just the other day, I was talking to a group of folks about museums and social, and every museum there was worried about the question of what about Facebook and its new changes. I'm sure you've read about Facebook's latest changes. They keep having changes and changing the way their algorithm works, their news feed, and museums and major outlets and media outlets are really worried about this. But one of the lessons about dealing with Facebook after all these years is that this too shall pass. And that means that we have to note that we are still in the early days of social, right? Facebook has been around for since 2004, and Twitter started in 2006. It seems like a long time, but it's still early days. And we need to understand that what looks like a crisis that will end the world is unlikely to be one. And that I also tell people that no matter how mad you get at Facebook, there's something worse that's also going to come. And the changes are going to be dramatic at some points, and others it'll just be so subtle you won't know. And those are sometimes the ones that you have to really watch out for. In the world of Facebook, one of the ways to think about how Facebook has changed is that in 2012, when President Obama won the election, when he was re-elected, his team announced the victory first on Twitter and then on Facebook, and that Facebook post became the most liked item in the history of Facebook. But just 4 years earlier, there were 0 likes on Facebook on that same equivalent posting that they had posted. So in 2008, 0 likes to millions of likes in 2012. And the reason was that the like button hadn't been invented in 2008. So something that we take for granted and calculate all kinds of things and is a big part of how content gets seen and shared and understood today did not exist till March of 2009. So this is a field that's going to change, and we have to be really aware of all of these changes so that we can also adjust as we go through as we watch all these changes happening as well. Here's a photograph that I really like from our Instagram collection, and this is from 2001. And people often think that Throwback Thursday needs to be really old photographs, like 1919. Here's 2001. And there you see the Met from an unusual angle, and that's the reservoir named after Jackie Onassis right next to it there that you can see. Another lesson is that despite all the fuss about social media, email still counts. I can't tell you how many times I've been in meetings in journalism land and elsewhere where folks think that everything can be done through social media. And a lot can be done with social media, but email still counts. At the Met, we have a team that does email marketing, and they are a critical resource for the Met. They do our main work with our membership. They work on our development issues. They are folks whose work will definitely be seen by hundreds of thousands of people because of the way that the nature of email. That even today, and I think for years to come, email will still have a role because not everybody is able to see and keep up with everything you're doing on social. And even things like your home page, which you think everybody's visiting, it just doesn't happen. But email plays a major role. So one of the things our team does a lot of is A/B testing to see what kind of headlines work, what kinds of things are resulting in click-throughs. And that kind of data is something that we keep a close eye on to make sure that we're able to maximize the potential of email despite all the noise about other things apart from email. Here is another picture from the Met from our Instagram collection. And this is the European Sculpture Court, which is very striking, as you can see. Here is another lesson. Media outlets usually work on incredibly short deadlines, and museums work on incredibly long deadlines. And this might be obvious to all of you, but for somebody coming from the world of journalism, that was news to me. So I was in my very first week in meetings about things happening a year plus away. And that was a surprise to me because in journalism, things are a lot faster. Now, having worked in universities, I certainly understand that. We used to joke that the shortest unit of time at a university is a semester. So if I discover the cure for cancer, I could go to the president and say, Mr. President, I'd like to do a course on this cure for cancer. And they would say, sure, next semester. And depending on when, it may not even be possible next semester. It might have to be 2 semesters or after the summer. So that kind of change has been different for me. I think that the long deadlines and the way that museums work, I think that's great. At the same time, I think we also want to be nimble enough to adjust and respond to certain things that happen, say, in the news or developments in the technology we're using, that we can be responsive in certain on certain occasions that we can be responsive. And so we were able to do that this year with when the Syrian crisis was even more in the news than it is now. We were able to kind of highlight some of the concerns that the Met and the museum community and the arts community has about keeping the Syrian art safe, as well as highlighting some of the Syrian art in the museum's collection. And so we were able to participate in that because we were nimble enough. So, sorry, I went ahead. So while the long deadlines are good, you want to see where you can adjust and be nimble enough to make changes. Here's another piece of art. These are Van Gogh's Oleanders from 1888. Here is another lesson. We talk a lot about big data. This morning I was at a breakfast about linked data and talking about that. Figuring out how to collect, study, and use data isn't new at museums. The most important number, I presume, for many years at the Met, the 2 most important numbers are how many people are coming through the door and how much money have we made from donations and things like that. So that's been something that the Met has been very good at collecting and tracking, and all museums are good at that. But now you have to track all kinds of new things and seeing and trying to understand how that data translates into what we can learn. So one of the things that we have started doing, which is new for us, is working with our audio guide. We now have metrics about audio guide usage and therefore where people are going in the museum. Before we had sort of, unless you did eyeball surveys, you really weren't able to track where people are going. What are they listening to? What point in the audio stop are they quitting and leaving? So things like bounce rates, which we keep track of online on the website, they're also going to be important as you build out your audio guides. We have 3,000 stops on our audio guide, and trying to get all that data is something new for us, and we're working with Antenna to make that as good a process and robust a process. One of the things that we said at breakfast is there are all kinds of new opportunities to get data, but it's very hard to keep track of all the data we're already getting, and who's going to study it, who's going to look through it, and try to get actionable data or information out of it is something that's going to be very important for museums to be thinking about. And at the Met, we are thinking about it, and I presume you're doing so at your locations as well. This is a picture that also was very popular on our Instagram feed. Instagram runs something called the popular page, and the ones that I'm showing you, almost all of them ended up on the Instagram popular page. And this is the inaugural exhibition of the new Costume Institute, the newly renovated Costume Institute, which will open in the spring. And this is the designer Charles James, who was Anglo-American. His work will be on display from May through August of 2014. And one of the things that I had heard a lot about before I came to the Met, and now I hear about every day, and people ask me about that all the time, is the Met Gala and all the fuss that comes out around that. It's such a big undertaking at the Met and a critical part of it, but I knew nothing about it except kind of reading about it. And so several people have asked, "Oh, can you get me a ticket to the Met Gala?" And I tell them, I think the only way I'm going is because I'll be working it somehow, doing something. Otherwise, I don't think I'll be anywhere near that. So this is what they're going to be talking about and working with this year. Another lesson is, despite all the planning you do, you never know what's going to strike a chord. You spend a lot of time trying to get people to see your work. You plan, this is going to be the one thing that everybody sees. And that used to be true in the world of traditional journalism, especially newspapers, where you laid out the front page and you knew that's where people were going to go. But that's changed in so many ways. I'm going to show you from the New York Times, the most emailed New York Times article of all time, and it may still be one of the top 2 or 3, if it may still be number 1, is a very unusual piece. It was not on page A1, but it was buried inside the newspaper in the Sunday Style section in what's called a Modern Love column. Some of you may know that. And this was a piece called "What Shamu Taught Me About a Happy Marriage." And this is before all the recent noise about the care of marine animals. But this was a woman writing about her husband and how she learned to deal with him because she talked to animal trainers at SeaWorld, and what Shamu, the killer whales trainer, how she worked with Shamu helped her understand how to deal better with her husband. And the funny part about this was, when I looked at this article, I was pretty sure that I didn't want my wife to see this. And we still get 2 print newspapers at my house. And I took that paper, and let's say I didn't make it really convenient for her to find it. But by Sunday afternoon, she had gotten this from 4 different people. And this was back in 2006, so it wasn't Facebook necessarily, but people had emailed it to her. Today, this article would be multiple times in her Facebook feed, and so she would definitely not miss it. So if you're trying to hide an article from your wife, it's impossible to do today. But as I said, this article would certainly not have been on the list of things that the New York Times would have said this is going to be the most viewed article. But it happened that way, and that's because of what people take and look at. And what strikes a chord, you never know. Another example of this is something that people are obsessed about in the world of media, and I know people at museums are also looking at very carefully, and that's the New York Times piece called Snowfall, which is about an avalanche. And this is, that particular article is probably the most decorated piece of American journalism in the last 5 years, if not longer. And that piece shows you, takes a look at kind of a new way of looking at your stories and how you do interactive storytelling. And I've been in meetings at the Met where we've talked about Snowfall and saying, how do we do that? And there are examples now, if you go online, you can see how people talk about how do you make a piece like Snowfall. It was an unusual, and it came out last year. And already you can see many people trying to imitate that as a way of storytelling. So in an example of how you can never tell what's going to strike a chord, this is 2 of our sets of sunflowers at the Met, the one on the left by Van Gogh and on the right by Taylor Newby, our social media person taking a photo of our flower collection that changes every week. And this one on the right ended up in Instagram's most popular page. So you never know what's going to strike a chord. Another lesson is that experimenting is the key to building audiences. And you need to try all kinds of things and be open to new ideas. And we've definitely tried to do that in the world of the Met. And as we've also seen in journalism, experimentation is a big thing. So here I thought I'd show you a little bit about a gentleman who many of you know, Neil Stimler, who works at the Met, who was an early adopter of Google Glass. And you see him on the left interacting with Google Glass and getting one of the devices. And then on the right, he's been wearing it all over the museum and also wearing it as he goes to places like the Studio Museum in Harlem and showing it to people. And I think it's a very important thing for us to consider. A lot of complaints now are about how people are in galleries kind of looking down at their instruments and at their devices instead of looking at the art. Well, when you wear Google Glass, you're kind of looking through the art. And what does that mean? And my own take is that this is obviously very early days. Starting next year, they're going to be opening out how people get access to them. It's $1,500, but there are several other companies that are also doing glass-like products. And we're going to see what kind of uptake there is. But at the same time, this is an example of how mobile is going to be so important in kind of everything we do. And trying to understand how this particular device and how people use it is going to be important. What you're also seeing is that many places are banning glass, right? So you've seen health clubs, casinos. Illinois is going to be the first state in America to ban driving with Google Glass. And I certainly would be very worried if people were getting in their cars and driving with Google Glass on. There was a woman in California who got a speeding ticket and was also cited for wearing glass. And the reason she was stopped was not because of glass. She was stopped because she was speeding. But she became a martyr for glass by saying this should be allowed and it's kind of heads-up display and all of that. But just my own personal feeling is I'd be very worried, unless I guess that if someone's wearing Google Glass in a Google self-driving car, how that'll go, I'm not sure. But in my presentation, you have the link to it. You can go and read about Neil's adventures with the world of glass and what he's been learning. So please ask him to share what he's been experiencing. Another key is collaborating with curatorial and education departments. For a department like ours is to work with lots of other folks. And I asked one of my colleagues in our media lab to share some of the things that they've been doing. So Don Undine shared this slide talking about the work of the Media Lab. And the Media Lab, of course, is an example of this connection between media and museums, that Media Lab, the MIT Media Lab, and others are famous for all the work that they do to make sure media is still relevant to new audiences. And that's some of the things that we're trying to do at the Met. And so here you see the intersection of what the Media Lab can do. And one of the things that we talk a lot about is that the Media Lab can be a place to connect kind of the expertise inside museums and the expertise of creative technologists. And that's going to be something that's increasingly critical to get people to kind of do things at the Met. So Don's team has done things like 3D hackathon. The Smithsonian, of course, did a very big hackathon recently, and using a 3D printer and how people can interact with that. We also have an API for it's the first API from the Met, an API of from our image collection, so that you can go in and look at our images and our records database. And the URL for that, I'll just give it to you, is www.scrapi.org. scrapi.org. And if you go there, you can see the start of a place that was very uncomfortable until recently, sharing everything with the world, to the point where it now has an API. What more lies ahead is still to be seen, but I think it gives you a sense that a place like the Met is more open to doing things than it might have been a few years ago. Here is a view of the Temple of Dendur, which many of you know. This was a gift of the Egyptian government to the United States, and then the Met won a competition to bring this to the Met in 1978. And one of the things that the Media Lab is working on in collaboration with our Egyptian department, this is an Egyptian department project, is to recolor the Temple of Dendur. This is the color we know for most Egyptian objects, but they used to be kind of colors like this. So reimagining, recoloring the Temple of Dendur is a project that the Media Lab is doing. And it's not something that the Media Lab does alone. It works very closely with the Egyptian department, and Diana Patch, our curator there, is very involved in this to see, so you can imagine that if you're able to project this, as you can see a small sliver being done there, we are very respectful, very careful, and working with the authority and expertise of the curators is absolutely essential for any kind of collaboration like this, and that's what you're seeing here. We're also doing things like concentrating on access, and we have a collaboration with the Parsons School of Design, looking at how we can design kind of the next generation of the way people interact and connect with our collection. So that's something that's also something we're paying attention to. We also run a we're involved in a New York City Museum Media Lab meetup that has a get-together every month. And the idea is to kind of share ideas and get people to work together. And one of the things that Don does is he puts on the wall an opportunity for people to write down what they're interested in, and then trying to find the right projects for museums to respond to these creative technologists. How do we get them connected to the world of the Met and arts like that, I think is going to be important for us as we go forward. Another lesson is that who links to you matters. One of the things that you can do is just kind of put your stuff out there and hope people see it. And I want to show you an example of how the most unlikely places can take your work, and that can result in a lot of views of your work. So this particular video that you're going to see is a short video from a furniture exhibition from the 1700s, a very clever furniture design, and with lots of hidden cabinets, as you're about to see. And this is the second most seen YouTube video from a museum. And the biggest one is from the American Museum of Natural History, and it's called the Known Universe. So that's the entire universe, and this is one cabinet. So it gives you a sense of the number one and number two. So sometimes you need the whole universe, and sometimes you need just a small cabinet. And you never know what's going to work, right? So we'll just get a sense of this here. Let me just show you. Let's just go forward here. You can see it's very clever. And what happened is that Gizmodo picked this up. Gizmodo, which is a blog that covers technology, picked this up, and then Reddit picked it up. And you can see from your YouTube traffic how big this became. So more than 4 million people have seen this video. And that shows you that you kind of, as I said, you never know what's going to strike a chord, but also who links to you matter. So one of the things we're working on is creating partnerships with influencers out there in the world of these technology companies so that we can work with them to get deeper connections, but also to have them share what we have and have them look at it and then share it with their audiences. So we want to think about each piece of content we create. Is there a specific small audience, but deeply connected audience that will want to see this? And I learned this from watching the work of a journalist named Peter Rojas. And Peter was a journalist who was working for Gizmodo. And then he left and started another blog called Engadget, which some of you tech folks will know. And when the Xbox came out, Bill Gates gave only 3 sit-down interviews. Gave one to the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and Engadget, which had only been in business for 6 months. And it was a one-man blog. And the reason Gates did that is because he knew you've got to do the Wall Street Journal for the business and the analysts and folks like that. The New York Times because of its influence. But the number of people that are going to buy the Xbox is going to be higher in a percentage basis, and maybe even just in raw numbers on the folks who buy it off of after reading Engadget. And so that kind of, can we cultivate not just the big platforms, which we want to do, but can we also cultivate smaller platforms with deep connections and deep passionate audiences is something that we're working on as well. And then my last Instagram, this is from our Oceania and Melanesia collection at the Met. And someone said this looks like the giant whale at the American Museum of Natural History. This is much smaller, and from the scale you can tell, but this is an example of a part of the museum that really lends itself well to Instagram and that kind of photography. And so the final lesson that I have for today is from our community blog that our community pages that we just put together. And you're doing all this stuff on social, you're doing all this blogging, you're doing all this, but it's just being sent all over the world, and it's not being seen necessarily, and people can't find it easily. So one of the things we did with the community page is that you can come in and people can find exactly what, all your Facebook, your Twitter, your Pinterest, all of it in one place. And so this thing is really this idea of that let's take the work you have, let's repurpose, redisplay, and resurface it so that people will find it. This idea that everything you do has to be brand new is not the case. I think that if you do all these things, get them seen by more people, that's a good place to put your energy. That doesn't mean you don't do new things and you don't do big, ambitious projects. But what turns out, already your ambitious projects are not necessarily being seen. And so I got this idea from one of my former students who runs social media at the World Bank, and his name is Jim Rosenberg. He's at Jim Rosenberg. And Jim talks about thinking about social media as your embassies. And what he means by that is that depending on which country you are, your different embassies will be of different sizes, right? So if you're the United States government, your embassy in London is really important and very big. You send your best officers there. Some other country will have a small embassy with like 2 guys and a Marine. And then for another country, that small country might be very important and they have a bigger presence. So you have to decide what size of your embassy is going to be depending on your audience and your interests. But at the same time, think of your website as your home country. That means everything that you point to in all these different embassies, everything still goes home to the big website. And that's something that we need to be emphasizing. So one of the things we do is when Taylor and Lucy post Facebook photos, they don't just post the photograph, they also post a link so that if someone wants to go in and go to our collections database and read through and learn more about that, they can. And that's going to be something that we're going to try to do with all our platforms. On Pinterest, for example, we find that people who come from Pinterest to our collection, our website, they stay longer and go deeper than almost any other place. So this idea that you have all these platforms, but let's bring them all back together and let's really work on surfacing them again and again is going to be something that we'll do more of. And so that wraps up my lessons for first 4 months. Thanks very much, everybody. So let's get some questions. Yep, absolutely.
Hello, my name is Yana Peel. Thank you very much for that fascinating survey. My question is, as you look back at your first year, perhaps, when you measure your success, will that be based on how, through digital, you've enhanced the experience for existing supporters of the museum, how you have brought new audiences into the physical building, or how you've democratized the cultural experience for those audiences that may never find their way to New York?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
All of the above, I think, is what we have to do. Tom Campbell has a big initiative to make the museum even more global than it is. We have a large percentage of our audience comes from outside America, but we want to do even more. We have this global museum leaders colloquium that we're doing. We're bringing in people, museum leaders from several institutions to spend 2 weeks in New York in April, and hopefully we'll do that on a regular basis. And so this idea of kind of how do we reach out to the world, and this part of the world is especially important. Tom just came back from China, and we're trying to do more, and you saw our outreach with our first contemporary art exhibition from China. So I think that this idea of reaching out to people, we want the Met to be on everyone's bucket list, but that can sound a little morbid, and not everybody will be able to come. But are there ways in which we can help them? And for those of you who attended Teresa's session, you heard about things like the timeline of art history and how that is such a critical piece of the Met intellectual property, so that people around the world are able to see our scholarly work and reach out. So it's not just the physical space. We certainly want more people to come. We're now open 7 days a week, which is a big thing for first time in 40 years or something like that. So we want more people to come, but we also want more people to experience the Met in as many digital platforms and formats as possible. So that includes things like our online collections, we're trying to digitize more of it. There are hundreds of thousands of items already up there. We want to do more. We have 1,000 of our Met publications are online and accessible, and you can download them right now. So we're trying to do more of that. And so are there ways we can continue to do that is going to be one of the things we look at.
Thanks, that was great. I can only hope it's going to be good after 12 months. The Met's had I don't know whether it's a policy, but when you're in the museum, there's very little media or interaction. And I wondered if you're going to sort of look hard at that, right, or is that too entrenched?
Well, one of the things that we want to do is to tell more people that we are on all these social media platforms, for one thing. in fact, when you walk in, you can't really know that. We've, by the way, moved away from the buttons to these stickers. And so on the stickers, there's a place where it says WW Met Museum. But we need to do more. We need to tell people that there's Wi-Fi throughout the museum. Lots of museums do that now, but you wouldn't even know that necessarily. So we want to do that. But I think you're talking more about the interactives in the galleries and things like that. So we are doing a lot of, for every exhibition, Chris's team and Paco Link, who does our creative development team, and others sit down with the folks, with the curators, to see what can be done in an interactive way. But that doesn't mean there should be interactives in every gallery or every exhibition. But I think you'll see, right now we have an exhibition called Shilla, Korea's Golden Kingdom. And there you'll see it's sponsored by Samsung, and you'll see there's a lot of Samsung bells and whistles, and including the largest television screen I've ever seen to display. But it works in that context. And this was something that came from the National Museum in Korea. And so I think we want to say, when it makes sense to have an interactive, we will. But other times, so it doesn't all have to be digital maps. It could be just a silk-screened map with some intro text on the wall. I think that would be fine. So that's something we'll definitely look at.
Hey, Sree.
Hey.
Thank you. That was great. So I guess this question is actually not specific to museums, but as the social media ecosystem kind of grows, and now there's also like Vine and all the other ones too, right? So what do you reference to decide which networks to join, and how do you decide how you're going to set intention for each of the networks?
So one of the things I'd mentioned is that so these are my slides, and at the end of my slides are slides from Taylor Newby on our social media team that you folks can look at on your own, that explain each of the platforms we're on now and what we're doing on each one, so that you can see. So it tells you on Facebook we work like this, but on Twitter we do something slightly different. So that's something that you can look at. I think that it depends on capacity. How much can we do? Even with 2 full-time people doing social media, it feels like they're already kind of, they don't have capacity to do more. I think any new platform we get onto, that has to be sustainable, has to be strategic, has to be something that we'll be doing for a long time. And so we haven't jumped on Vine necessarily. I think we've done some Vines, but it isn't something we're doing kind of all the time. We use Instagram, also has that video feature, so we're doing that. I remember when people were complaining that there was videos are too short at 15 seconds, and now it's 6 seconds. It's kind of amazing how that happened. But we're not on Tumblr, for example, but we're looking at Tumblr to see if it makes sense for us and our audience. And it's being very careful to join. You don't have to be first on any of these platforms. And as you'll see, on each of our platforms, you'll see the year we joined. And it may not, I'm sure many of your museums were way ahead of us in some of those cases, and in others we might have been ahead as well. But we're never first.
Hi, thank you very much, Sarah Kenderdine, Museum Victoria.
Hi.
Hi. It's in reference to a comment that you just made where you said, and we could see it on the largest television screen ever, right? So museums, or the world, is entering a 4K and 8K revolution. And most museums have digitized their collections, they've put it all online, and it's a fraction of that in terms of resolution. Mm-hmm. And is this something that you have noticed? Is this something that you're planning for?
Well, one of the things, there's a whole movement to doing high-res photographs and as you know, and museums. I don't think enough museums are doing that, and we want to see more places do that. This digitization that I think many museums have done a good portion, but most have not. And that's something that I think will be demanded of us by our visitors. Yeah. And that's the same thing with the mobile stuff, that people are going to demand it. as much as what a museum might want. You're going to see that they're going to pull us. The audience is going to pull us, just the way that they did in journalism, that the audience pulled us. I saw a stat from MoMA that 74% of their visitors bring a device and use it, and I think they look at art on that. That's very high, I think. And I don't think our audience is there yet, but MoMA's
Sure.
is. Yeah.
I mean, from being around museums for many years, I know that when we all digitized our collections, we believed it was for the one time. It was a massive effort. It was very expensive, et cetera, and it's going to have to happen all over again.
Right.
Yeah.
Nancy, do you want to mention that the device, that new installation that we were talking about, and we thought it was $60,000, but it's $700,000. Do you want to just mention that? We were looking at it yesterday at the Maritime Museum.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
Well, that's Sarah's installation. Did you talk about it?
Oh, okay.
The ABI.
The round one?
Yeah.
Was it up?
No.
Oh.
It's visible but not active.
No, but
Oh,
I was just
okay.
struck by how great it sounded. I wasn't able to see it, but how great it sounded. But also the price idea, that some of us thought it was 60,000 and somebody said it was $1 million.
Well, yeah,
So-
it's not quite 60,000, but we do immersive systems that are a lot cheaper than that one. That's a pretty deluxe, active stereo, if you want it, cluster-based system. So it's a deluxe system. But to do that work, in fact, and that's why I bring up this scanning issue, is the museum gave us their high-resolution photos. And they're high-resolution photos that they paid a lot of money to get done, which were color inaccurate and way too low resolution to do anything with. And that's the best that they had, and they paid a lot of money to get them done. And I see it everywhere now as the bigger the screens that we have, that there is not any content to put on them. And a colleague of mine who develops scanners in Kyoto he's Toshiba and all the companies, Panasonic, come to him because he's the only person that's got content of that dimension, so they can test these systems. So it's a really interesting moment, I think, where we're reinventing those collection paradigms that we'd set up as
and
benchmarks.
repaying for them, which is...
And repaying for them,
yeah,
exactly.
It's very
exactly.
painful to hear, right?
Yeah.
I just kind of think that's, we have to pay for the lights every day when we turn them on, we have to pay for staff, and the problem has been, and I hold my hand up as guilty about it, but part of this, to get new systems into the museum, to get acceptance, like social media. I was one of those media managers who said, oh, it'll only take 10 minutes a day. It's no big deal. And so the director goes, oh, okay then. And so you get it. And then, of course, 2 full-time staff isn't enough. And we've got to stop with these myths that anything important is going to be quick, easy, and cheap.
One other thing about social media that we've learned is the importance of doing social media around the clock, not by having people around the clock, but using the post-dating tool so that you can do that. So we used to post social media updates kind of during the daytime or into the early night in Eastern time, and now we do it throughout the night, and we find that especially Asia has resulted in very good traffic for that. And that's something that the National Geographic folks learned, because they were doing kind of 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern time, and then they started doing 1 a.m. Eastern time using social flow. And you can do this with Hootsuite or TweetDeck. And they found they were getting huge amounts of traffic at 1 a.m. because of China, Asia, India, places like that.
And we've been keeping our U.S. colleagues up all night with our MWA 2013.
No one's sleeping in the U.S., right? They're all reading this, reading everything we're saying.
Tim Hart from Museum Victoria again. I had a question about demographics and social media. Just struck me when you were talking about the Pinterest numbers coming through. That I'm sure other people are already doing this, but I haven't sort of got my head around it at all, is that presumably social media is sort of segmenting out into groups that we can easily, well not easily, but at least identify, and that would be a great guide as to where we should be.
Right.
We're all about being where the audiences are, and if we had more of a read on where the likely ones are, it's probably not Facebook for the Met, and that's not a big number. So, I mean, and as a journalist, I presume they're more sophisticated with analysing that.
Sure, they are. But I'm pretty sure there's someone in the room who has some data about demographics and social media in museums. Does anybody here want to talk about that? What you're doing at your museum? Who are the social media managers in the room?
There are some kind of blog posts and generous contributions from a range of social media experts, kind of giving tips like, Facebook is huge in the Philippines, and you can't use Twitter in China, and the time zone things. But it's a good question. We'll see if we can drag together some of the better, more comprehensive posts on that and make them available on the museums and the website. The much larger audience.
Right, but that's what we need to do. That's what I was saying, that we are good at the in-person demographics. One of the other things that we're doing at the Met is also creating a Weibo account so that we can actually do social media into China that we haven't done yet. So
We did that for this conference.
yeah, good.
Hi.
Hi.
Pei from Antenna International. What are the 3 top challenges as a CDO at the Met? Thank you.
One who is getting, just in terms of the museum, thinking about digital are there ways in which each kind of work process and the way things are already being done, can it be improved by digital technology? And so we're looking at things like development, membership, where are things that we can help with that. So that's one thing. Second is making the digital media department, which was carved out of multiple departments, operate as one unit. And that's part of a cultural thing that will take time. And so those are I think 2 of the challenges. But 3 is, how do you justify new platforms, new initiatives when money is tight? Even at a big place like the Met, resources are tight, and resources are also planned well in advance. So how do you make the case for that? And can you show the ROI on those initiatives? I think those would be 3 things that.
Forbes Hawkins, Museum Victoria again. You're perhaps fairly uniquely positioned to answer this. Do you think that museums have a role in responding to current affairs? You spoke before about how museum deadlines are so long compared to journalistic deadlines.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you think that there is a way that museums can become better at actually responding to things that are happening in the moment, and have you actually seen any examples of that being done well?
Well, at the Met, we did some work around the Syrian crisis, so that was an example. I think that it depends what kind of museum. I think the science museums have an opportunity because of who they are and what their audience is. I know people will be interested in things, so you could respond to either current events or even pop culture events that are science going on. So some of you might be fans of Breaking Bad, for example, and Mythbusters, the television show, did a kind of Mythbusters about Breaking Bad and all the bad science in Breaking Bad. And so you can, and I know there was some kind of Breaking Bad exhibition at some of the moving image museums, some traveling exhibition. But you can, so science, I think, is particularly good for that, because you can get people curious based on what they're doing. So for example, I have 2 10-year-olds, and in the 10-year-old world, a big thing is Minecraft. And if any of you have preteens or teens and know the craziness about Minecraft, you told my children that this museum has a Minecraft exhibit, they will be there, and they would maybe never leave. So are there ways in which, so it's not necessarily current events, but current kind of zeitgeist opportunities as much as current events. And that's, I think, that we can see that. I'm sure the Smithsonian and places like that have a wide range of topics that they cover can respond very quickly. And then, of course, sports museums do that all the time. Things go to museums or halls of fame and things like that based on news. So.
So the Museum of Man in San Diego does that all the time, which is an anthropology museum. So the Egypt conflict was one that they jumped down right away.
Hi, Michael Parry from Powerhouse Museum. Well, very soon anyway. I had a question about, which goes back to your role and your appointment, which is one of the discussions we've been having over the duration of the conference is in fact the role of leadership in the organisation and the role of strategy and digital strategy. So obviously it's a slightly biased position you're in because obviously you believe it's a good idea. You took the job.
Yes.
But I wondered if you could reflect upon what you think it means in the difference between digital becoming part of everyone's role within a museum, and how that may intersect with you being
Sure.
a leader for digital in an organisation.
Sure. Well, the first thing is that at the Met, I work very closely with the CIO of the Met, the Chief Technology Officer. These are all titles, by the way, that mean different things in different places. When I was CDO at Columbia, the CDO at Harvard had a completely different job than I did, but we both had the same title. So you're seeing that in museums as well. There are people here, I'm sure, who have that title, and their work is different from mine. But what you've said is absolutely right. One day, the Chief Digital Officer of the museum will be the director, right? We're not there yet, but it'll become the kind of job where it has to be at the very top. A curator will have those skills and be up there. Right now, it's absolutely not something that a director needs to have because the director has great people to work on that and the director has too many other things going on. But I'm talking about 5, 10, 15 years from now, you'll see that that'll become part of the portfolio of what a director does at a museum or at that kind of level. But for now, the main thing is to work with the different departments and say, are there things that you've not thought of that we can help? And so I work very closely with the CTO, and one way we've divided up the work is he does the infrastructure and all the kind of back-end operations, and we do the kind of audience-facing aspects of it. But we work very closely together on things like where to put the Wi-Fi, how much we do, what do we do with that, things like that.
Harold Kramer, Zurich. Well, since the relaunch of your website, the website of the Met Museum looks a little bit like all these boring university and magazine websites. Is there a specific reason why the Met has switched off the legendary starting page with the daily changing object of the day?
So we have I can't claim credit for much at the web, at the museum, but one of the things we have done is put a changing object of the day on the front page of the Met. So we do have that now. It may not be prominent enough, but it is there. It didn't exist when I came.
That's a fault. That's a fault.
And I'm sorry, you?
I was going to answer Harold's question.
Okay, please go ahead.
Okay, so taking away the object of the day happened during our tenure, and that was us old folks, and that was my project actually. So people really didn't care for the amount of time that it took to load and look at the object of the day. On top of that, I think we stopped it in 2003? Yeah, we stopped in 2003. And one of the key things that actually motivated us to stop having it was that we did these focus groups. Do you remember those? People thought that you could buy that object. So it was kind of a bummer.
So what a gallery should do is to have a link and say, they should say, look at that, and you can buy it from us. But also there was a different point in time when loaded, we used to call WWW the World Wide Wait, if you remember, and now that's less of an issue. So I presume that'll change. We are constantly. I just want to tell our colleague that we are looking at constantly changing and upgrading the look and feel of the website and everything we do. What I'm not as keen on is doing kind of a relaunch every year, every 2 years. Instead, let's just do iterative changes on a regular basis. Let's constantly make it better rather than let's give birth to this new thing. So thinking more like software design or software production rather than this big thing. Sometimes better is not good? Wow, that's very deep. I might be too jet lagged to understand that. We'll talk about it over drinks, maybe. Okay. Okay. I think it's 4 a.m. or something. So
We should give you a rest.
No,
You've been
thank
so
you.
generous with your time.
No,
Thank you, Sree. Can you all join me in thanking him for...